How can you tell if a plant is suffering from a nitrogen deficiency? Sometimes you can see it, oftentimes you can see it. So let me show you some pictures. The visual deficiency symptoms in grasses is yellowing and first appearing in older leaves. Highly important to note this. In grasses, sometimes you see a V-shaped chlorotic pathway from the leaf tip back to where the leaf attaches along the midrib of the plant itself. Just like you see in this picture of corn, right? So it's sort of a V-shaped chlorotic symptom that starts at a point near the midrib and broadens out. And what does this tell you? What does this tell you about translocation of nitrogen in plants? What it tells you is because the visual deficiency symptom is in the older leaves, that nitrogen is readily translocated from the older leaves to the newer leaves. When a plant perceives a deficiency, it scavenges nitrogen from the older leaves and translocates it to the newer leaves. So the newer leaves will look green and healthy while the older leaves suffer. Let's look at some additional photos. This is a great photo of nitrogen deficiency in corn in the field. So you can see some pretty excessive nitrogen deficiency symptoms in these lower leaves. In fact, the lower leaves are not only chlorotic, but they're necrotic. Classic V-shaped deficiency symptom in older leaves. And if you look up, most of the newer leaves show no signs of deficiency because nitrogen has been translocated from the older leaves to the newer leaves. Here's another example. So this is a study that I worked on years ago. And the corn on the right had received manure at an agronomic rate. These plants look great. Okay, yeah, there's some deficiencies down in here, but by and large, these plants look great as compared to adjacent to the plot on the right. The plot on the left showed severe deficiency symptoms. And in this plot, I can tell you what we did. I'll keep it general, but we added excess carbon to the soil in the form of biochar that did not contain a lot of nitrogen. And that offset this carbon to nitrogen ratio that you're going to learn about in this unit. And the deficiency symptom in this corn was severe. Let's look at another picture. These pictures come from China. And this is another study that was similar to the study that I showed you on the previous slide. This was a study that used a carbon amendment with or without nitrogen and potassium, right? So this soil needed both nitrogen and potassium. So they applied carbon in parts of this field, and then they applied carbon in the form of biochar, plus nitrogen or potassium. The portions of the field that just received the carbon amendment alone, the lower leaves showed classic nitrogen deficiency symptoms, while in the portion of the field that received both the carbon amendment plus nitrogen or phosphorus, no problem. So that's grasses or corn. What about broadleaves? Broadleaves, you typically see interveinal chlorosis, but it's in older leaves as well, right? Because nitrogen is translocated from the older leaves to the newer leaves. Sometimes you just see pale color, all right? And this happens often with soybean. You see a pale yellow color, and sometimes it leads to necrotic symptoms in older leaves. And the veins are just washed out. They're just no longer visible anymore. And it's uniform across the entire leaf in older leaves. And this is a halfway decent picture of that in soybean. Here's another picture of nitrogen deficiency in soybean. Might be hard for you to tell that it's in older leaves, but if you were to stand out in this field and look down, you would realize that it is in older leaves on plants. And some plants are simply suffering to a greater degree than other plants. And the plant is just washed out with respect to the older leaves. And here is a picture of nitrogen deficiency in tomato. And this happens often with tomato. Maybe some of you have seen this. The older leaves start turning chlorotic. It's older leaves, so it tells you it's likely nitrogen. Could be another element, but it's likely nitrogen. And the newer leaves look dark and green. So I hope this helps you identify and observe nitrogen deficiencies in the environment.